Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
You may have heard in the news this afternoon that an over-18s drag show... Now remember what I'm saying here, an over-18s drag show. This is not a drag show where children are exposed to people, you know, who are dressed unruly or whatever it is. This is an over-18s drag show by a group called Queens of the Party, was due to take place in Carlow next week. However, the organisers of the show have cancelled it because of complaints. I wonder why. We'll find out in a second. As we know, drag has been getting a lot more attention in the news lately. A lot of negative attention, unfortunately, for the drag queens, especially in the United States. However, that is usually in relation to performances, as I said already, in front of children that would be wholly inappropriate. But here to give us an update on the situation is the Mayor of Carlow and Councillor Fintan Phelan. Fintan, good evening to you.
Good evening, Niall. How are you keeping?
Good. Nice to talk to you, Fintan. Now, Fintan, firstly, when was this booked, or when was it all, when did the posters go up first? I've seen the poster for it already, and it looks kind of innocent enough. When did the poster go up for it?
Yeah, so my understanding is over the last number of weeks, this was advertised as an event happening in a local hotel in Carlow, one of our finest hotels here in the town, the Seven Oaks Hotel. So it was advertised to take place there by TNT Promotions, were the promoters of it. And then Queens of the Party were the drag show that was going to be performing there.
Yeah, so there's 3 drag queens. It has LGBTQ plus on the top of the poster. There's a kind of rainbow flag, and it says it's after 9 o'clock at night or something like that. So it's not for children, right? It was an adult, and most drag shows are usually for adults. So what were the complaints in relation to?
Yeah, so unfortunately then it has transpired that there was a number of, and I wouldn't even describe them as complaints in many respects. I haven't seen them, but according to those that the promoters and the hotel themselves, there were more complaints and online abuse that was happening over the show. Might I add, this abuse was only from a small minority, and it certainly doesn't reflect the people of Carlow, and certainly doesn't reflect the people that I deal with on a daily basis, who we would be a very welcoming community here in Carlow to our LGBT colleagues.
And was there a suggestion at some point that there was going to be a matinee show or something for children? Or where did this come from? Or where did it stem from? Or did it just stem from Mary on Facebook, who kind of put 2 and 2 together and made 12?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. It seems to be, and unfortunately what's happening over the last number of months is whipping up of fear and anxiety on social media and targeting LGBT events. And, these events should be a safe place for those in the LGBT community and their allies to enjoy and to relax and feel comfortable. And as a community, we want to support our LGBT plus colleagues. And unfortunately, a small minority targeted that, and the promoters felt that they had no option but to cancel.
I mean, don't get me wrong, and I want to be fair, Fintan, to people who may be listening and saying, well, hold on, Niall, I seen a video in America and there was some drag queen half naked running around in front of children. I have absolutely no objection to somebody complaining if it's a drag show that's sexualised in front of children in the middle of the day. I think most people would agree it's probably inappropriate. But to clarify, this is for adults. Now, drag is not my bag, as they say. I wouldn't be a fan of drag queens. But if that's your bag and you want to go and see it, well, so be it. I mean, that's what you want to go and do. And it's after 9 o'clock at night. It's for adults. You make a choice as an adult to go and see it. That's your bag. That's what you do. So I don't understand, but I do understand some of the negative attention that some of the stuff, mainly not in this country, thankfully, but from abroad has got. And I'm sure you've seen that too.
Well, I suppose I think it's very clear what this show was taking place. It was taking place in the evening time after 9 o'clock, and it was for over 18s. And that was made very clear on the poster. And unfortunately, others then tried to bring outside elements into this. And I suppose, it's disappointing because Carlow has one of the largest Pride festivals outside the city in the country. And the events that Carlow Pride Festival host are second to none. For example, they'll have a massive parade and festival in our town park on Sunday, the 2nd of July. And I'd encourage everybody across Ireland to come down and enjoy that day, because it's always a day filled with good spirits, and it's a family fun day, really.
Now, you also mentioned this as well, that you're seeing a worrying growth in this online abuse. What when you say you've seen this kind of negative attention towards LGBTQ plus, or is it just drag queens in particular you've noticed this?
No, I think there is a growing trend, and this would reflect conversations I've had with our local Carlow Pride Festival here. There's a growing trend of targeting of LGBTQ plus events and targeting them online, and that seems to be growing. Thankfully, our local committee here aren't deterred by that, but that does seem to be growing. But in saying that, Niall, it's still a very small minority that take it towards abuse. And we as a community here are very supportive. I'll give you an example, Niall. Last year, I was very happy as mayor to champion with our local authority the introduction of a rainbow crossing in one of the main streets in our town.
I remember the story. Yes.
And that is a clear example of how, as a community, we are very welcoming, and we want to show that we support in an open way our colleagues.
And this online abuse, it would be hateful in a sense, I suppose, most of this. Now, I'm going to bring this on slightly if I can, because what happened, and I completely agree with you, by the way, it was wrong for people to complain about a show that's on after 9 o'clock and is geared towards adults, no matter what they were doing. And by the way, from the posters, it doesn't look like it was sexualised in any way anyway. But that's for adults to decide. They can pay to go and see it, or they can go and see it and have a drink and enjoy it, or they can not bother their arses going to see it if they don't want to. I think where people should have an issue, or do have an issue sometimes, is when it's daytime and there's children involved and something that may be sexualised. But leaving that aside, and I'm with you 100% of that, people shouldn't have complained, and I'm sorry they had to cancel it, because they should be able to enjoy their own events if that's what they want to do. But in relation to the online abuse and this growing online abuse, it kind of brings us to what's been in the news over the last few weeks. And as a member of Fianna Fáil yourself, your own party would have voted in favour of the hate speech laws. Are you familiar with the hate speech laws, and would you be in favour of them yourself?
Yeah, look, and I think this whole area is becoming more and more complex. And we have to be very cognizant, Niall, of language we use. And I suppose that's why there was that the hate speech laws are being introduced to try and combat that. When you say we're trying to combat that, and there's massive debate going on at the moment in relation to these particular laws. Former Minister for Justice Michael McDowell has now got involved and written a letter, quite a stern letter, by the way, to Simon Harris in relation to it. And I'm assuming he believes it could be constitutionally challenged through the Supreme Court. The laws themselves, we do have incitement to hatred laws in this country anyway, that can be used in severe cases when somebody has incited hatred or incited violence against another person. And by the way, can we all say from the outset, and I hope all our listeners would agree, and including yourself, Fintan, that, targeted hateful speech towards an individual is wrong on every single level. Targeted violence, inciting hatred towards any community or any person because of their colour, their creed, their gender identification, or whatever it happens to be, is wrong on every single level, and we should all condemn it. But, and there is a but here, we do have to be careful, because we tread a fine line between what somebody defines as hate speech, which is somebody else's just what they call in law common abuse. And sometimes, we saw what happened on the Joe Duffy show going back about 6 months ago, where when we try to stop debate, it doesn't work very well, because there's always two sides to debate, and I hope there is. And as a mayor of a town, if you were responsible for bringing in the laws in Carlow, I'm assuming if you were voting once a week on the laws, you would like to have people there who disagree with you as well as those who agree with you. So in other words, we have to have debate in society. And the fear is the hate speech laws, the way they're currently written and devised at the moment, will do away and eradicate debate, because there won't be dissenting voices, because people will be afraid to dissent in case they are called hateful. There has to be debate. There's no question about that, Niall. I don't think anyone's questioning that. The Irish hate speech laws, the past laws, were there from the 80s, in a time when, social media wasn't around. So I think there is a need to update those.
Absolutely.
To try and deal with what we're seeing now in relation to social media, networks and social media content and what people post on that. And I think it's important that those laws are updated to take account of that. But yes, of course, debate is healthy. Take, for example, the issue we're discussing, LGBTQ+. The last major debate we had in this country was the gay marriage referendum in 2016. And that was an opportunity in 2015, and that was an opportunity for people to put forward various sides of the argument.
And I would love to, and I want to see that continue, because that keeps me in a job as well, Fintan, because I don't want to be in a situation where we have, and we'll go back to what you talked about, marriage equality, right? And the referendum that took place. There was many people I had on the show, because as you know, we take many different opinions on this show, and people come on that show that said, if two men love each other or two women, why shouldn't they be allowed to get married? And absolutely. And then I had other people on the show who were coming on who may have been Christian, and they say, absolutely not, it's abhorrent, it's sinful, and it's disgusting. So, and by the way, I don't agree with those people, but I do fight for their right to have an opinion. Now, that could be classed as hate speech, and that will silence those people. We went through a lot of trouble in this country to have a referendum to get rid of blasphemy, which protected one community, which is the religious community. And now it seems to me we want to bring in more laws, more blasphemy laws, to protect another group of communities. Because, as I said, we already have incitement to hatred. Yes, we could update it a little bit. There's no doubt about that. But I think if people are responsible for crudely racist comments or targeting an individual or harassing an individual verbally or otherwise, they should be taken to task. But to bring in a blanket ban on speech, and just to give you an idea of what they say in the legislation, Fintan, the legislation said hate includes bias, prejudice, contempt, hostility or bigotry. Incitement means behaviour towards or communication about a person or a group of persons that could create a risk of discrimination. Now, I'm going to give you an example, and I don't mean to be crude on the air, and I certainly don't want to offend anybody. But if somebody comes on the air to me tonight and says, Niall, I don't believe a man can be a woman, as far as I'm concerned, they're still a man. To the LGBT community and a transgender person listening, they would find that quite hateful. They would say that encourages discrimination against our community. But I don't want that man to be silenced from saying that. I want him to be allowed to have his view, because if we don't hear those views, we will never get on in society. We'll never understand them. Do you understand?
And I think, people are coming from various different perspectives, Niall, and I think that has to be allowed. And that's why the legislation is making its way through the Oireachtas. It hasn't been enacted
well,
yet.
It's been passed by almost everybody apart from 14 independent TDs.
But I think the what you have said there, at the outset there in relation to, opinions that are prejudiced, that are racist, that are discriminatory, it's a matter, certainly anything that is racist or discriminatory shouldn't be tolerated. And I make, no apology for that.
But who defines, when we use the words, I mean, I would hope people don't make racist comments, right? But I've heard people being accused of being racist, I don't believe there were racist comments at all. It depends on who's defining it. But the words, for example, to say that it includes bias, prejudice, contempt, hostility or bigotry. If somebody wants to be hostile towards somebody that they don't agree with their community, or they don't agree with their practice, or they don't agree with their whatever it is, I believe they're quite entitled to do that, as long as they don't hurt that person, physically hurt them, or incite any hatred from anybody else towards them. I believe they're quite entitled. People are entitled to hold a view, even if it's a dissenting view that we don't like.
Absolutely. People are, and a healthy debate, by the way, is crucial for democracy. It's crucial. And I don't think the hate speech laws, I think it's in fairness, a lot of the independent TDs are scaremongering, I think, in large respect in relation to pulling red herrings that people will be accused of and will end up in jail. That's simply not going to happen. The bottom line is,
when you've got the richest and most powerful man in the world, Fintan, commenting on it.
But our hate speech laws are outdated at the moment. They're from the 1980s.
Absolutely.
I'm
not disagreeing with you.
They need to be updated.
But these laws, the current legislation that is being proposed, and I'm not too sure if you've read it or not, George Orwell would be proud of it. That's what's being suggested, and that's the quotation I'm hearing. I'm hearing Elon Musk. I'm hearing other people around the world, people who are, some of them a lot more intelligent than I'd ever be, and I'm hearing people saying these laws, I've spoken to barristers about it, and they're saying these just could not be put through, because it essentially, what it does is stifle free speech.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, I do think Elon Musk, as an example, leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, that's your personal opinion. He's the richest man in the world and quite successful, so he's obviously cleverer than you and me at making money and being a success in his life.
Of course, but there's various ways to be successful. But I do think that our laws do need to be updated, for sure. We have to move with the times. And, when someone is abusive online on social media, there is a worry there that can't be dealt with at the moment. and that needs to be dealt with. And I think the updated laws will allow that to happen. And we'll only see, what happens in practice. And laws can change, it can be updated, it can be amended. And that's the critical thing here. But without question, our laws need to be updated. If you look at what happened, and go back to what happened in relation to this incident, it's not acceptable that people, go online and in many respects, don't give their
They're
full
misinformed.
name, don't give proper name.
Misinformed.
Anonymous.
Yes.
They're anonymous. And they troll different sites, they troll local events, and they cause great hurt to the LGBT plus community. And
from the outset, I've agreed with you, Fintan. The people who objected to this particular event, which is an over 18s event after 9 o'clock, were misinformed, clearly misinformed. About what this particular event was. And they're obviously, it's misinformation. And I don't agree with misinformation. So, and they obviously spread that misinformation amongst a community of people, probably online. And, and obviously all complained about it and got it cancelled. And that's sad to see, because people should be entitled to have fun, do whatever they want to do, as long as it's in an adult setting, if that is the type of show it is, right? And I'm not suggesting the show is sexualised, because maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's after 9 o'clock at night and they're adults. They can do what they want, right? But all I'm saying to you is that we have to be careful how we tread with this, because I don't want to see a situation where we've seen an example of it where RTÉ were nearly brought before the Oireachtas Committee for having what was a balanced debate just because that balanced debate might offend people.
There's no doubt. And by the way, there's no one more frustrated sometimes when you go on to programmes and, there has to be a 50-50 split in arguments when it's very clear that there's one side is the more logical side, in terms of economic debates or whatever it is, and you have a scenario where, for example, when you have X number of candidates and parties on 1-2% get equal time as parties with a lot more support, there's an imbalance there. I don't think anyone wants to see a scenario where there's not fair or there's not free speech.
No, we don't live in a dystopian society, do we? You know what I mean? That's not what we want.
No one wants to see that. We want to see debate. I deal with debate every day of the week with people on various issues, and that's good. That's healthy for a democracy. But there has to be a balance between what is robust debate, what's accepted, and what veers into unacceptable territory towards bias or towards...
And I agree with you, but who decides that? The person who's offended by it? That's not who should decide that, because offences, as we know, is always taken. It's usually never given. It's always taken. So, by me saying something... And let me give you an example. I was on The Tonight Show going back about 2 years ago, and we were talking about immigration. And I, at the time, said, I believe that the Irish government should do as much as they can to support as many people as they possibly can. And people who are coming from war-torn countries, I said the red carpet should be out. I said these families and these people need our help. But I said we can't have our system being abused either by economic migrants. I said there's a limit to what we can do as a small country. I was immediately called a racist by somebody of colour who was sitting beside me. Now, that person thought I was a racist just for saying that. So should racism be a crime depending on who interprets what's racist and what's not? Do you understand where I'm going with this? That one person's interpretation of something is very different to another person's interpretation.
And I accept that, but ultimately the An Garda Síochána and the courts are going to have to litigate this and going to have to...
they'll be very busy.
Take each case. But they'll take each case as they come. It's not going to be a case as I accuse you of something and that's it, case closed, end of story.
But
that's not going to happen.
But they'll be very busy, Fintan, because people will be afraid to say anything. Okay, can I ask you a question? If you would have been in the Dáil last week when this was passed through the third stage, I think it was the Dáil, it said us to go to the O'Shannon and the Oireachtas, right? But if you'd have been the Dáil, would you have voted in favour of the legislation?
Yes, I would have voted in favour of the legislation.
Have you read all the legislation, Fintan?
Yes, I have read the legislation, and if we look, Niall, at why is this being introduced, and you can, tinker around the edges with various issues or problems which can be resolved. But if we look at the very essence of why this was brought in, it's because our hate crimes legislation urgently needs to be updated, and it's
Section 3. Okay, Section 3 of the legislation is almost like saying people steal in this country, so let's just ban people who have hands just in case they steal. Because it says, in any proceedings for an offence under the section where it is proved that the accused person was in possession of material, such as referred to in subsection 1, and it is reasonable to assume that the material was not intended for personal use of the person shall be presumed until the contrary is proved to have been in possession of the material in contravention of the subsection. In other words, if somebody sends you something that may be discriminatory or racist, and you had no intentions of passing it on, it's up to you to prove that you'd no intentions of passing it on. It's not up to the courts to prove that you did. I mean, this is guilty, and this is when I spoke to a barrister last week on the air. And he said that would be challenged in any high court or Supreme Court. He said essentially what you're saying is you're guilty until you're proven innocent. I mean, you can't have legislation like that. You don't bring in a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
But Niall, I think if
are you aware of that piece? Are you aware of that part of the legislation?
Yes, but if you
and you agreed with that, and you agreed with that, Fintan.
But if I'm taking the legislation in essence as a whole, Niall, and if the people I speak to, they feel there is a need for a serious reform of our legislation to try and deal with the ever-evolving issue of hate speech on social media. And that is the ultimate goal here that we have to try and achieve.
But again, as I say to you, and we'll finish this conversation by saying it depends on who's defining that. And we can't be bringing everybody to court just because somebody makes a complaint to the guards that somebody went online and said something about a transgender or said something about a gay person or something about a person of colour, or they said something in relation to some other minority or community, or even some other gender, which is basically nearly everybody in the population when you look at all the different characteristics that we talk about. You can't have... That's just people saying there was general abuse. Now, if they target an individual, of course, absolutely. And by the way, there's laws there called harassment anyway, so we should be able to deal with that. If somebody's being targeted, be it a politician indeed or anybody.
But you've said it there, you know, if someone is making inferences if someone is saying something about someone of a different creed, of a different colour, of a different sexual orientation, it obviously depends on what they're saying. And if what they're saying is discriminatory or racist, well then it should be tackled. And if they're saying that on online forums, there needs to be a manner in which that can be addressed. And I think that is ultimately the aim of this legislation. And like huge work has been done, Niall. And
but
again,
to me,
I come back
to me, incitement to hatred, you know, and to everybody listening, logically is, you know, for somebody to go online or to publicly state or to suggest violence towards a community, to suggest, I believe all person of such characteristics should be rounded up and something done with them, or I believe all people of such characteristics should be beaten up tomorrow, or whatever it is. That is inciting hatred towards people. Not turning around, for example, and saying, as I gave the example, and it's only an example, it's not something I agree with, earlier on, that I don't believe a man can be a woman. But that, to a transgender, the transgender community, could be seen as hatred and discrimination. And I don't want to see that speech being stopped if somebody wants to make a complaint to the Garda Síochána, because people will be afraid to talk, because this legislation has been condemned by clever people than you, me, Micheál Martin, and Leo Varadkar, all across the world has been condemned by academics around the world as being... Ireland is now the focus when it comes to hate speech. We're the focus of the world because of this piece of legislation. And we seem to be trundling on with it without saying, well, okay, surely we should say at this point, let's have a look at this again. Maybe we're getting something wrong here. Maybe, we could pull back. Maybe we're using a sledgehammer to crack a nut here. Let's make exceptions in this. And, common abuse, as it's called in law, was always acceptable. There was a very famous case many, many years ago, and you may remember it, Fintan, because I'm not too sure if you're as old as me, but Albert Reynolds took a case against a newspaper in this country because they called him a gombeen. Do you remember that case? Gombeen.
I don't remember that case. No. Too young to remember that.
Well, as far as I know, I don't speak Oscailga, but as far as I know, gombeen is a liar. Anyway, right? He lost his case over here. He then took it to the UK for defamation, and he won his case, but he won a single guinea. Right? So in other words, the judge wasn't going to give him any money, but he said, okay, you win your case, but all you're getting is like a penny essentially. So in other words, the point being made is that we have to accept that there's common abuse in society and people will abuse each other. Now, they shouldn't, but they do. We can't criminalise speech or stupidity. We have to be careful how we do that, because then we're bordering onto dangerous territory of banning free speech. It's an inalienable right, to have the freedom to express yourself. Yes, you must be responsible for what you say, but you must have freedom of expression.
Of course there has to be freedom of expression, Niall, but I suppose it comes down to the levels and the grades of abuse that one is engaging in. You know, like there are different degrees of abuse that someone can put up, and certainly in many respects, a lot of that, what this legislation is intended to do, is target a lot of that, and I think that's the ultimate aim of it. Of course, there are. I think with any legislation, you can pull, various red herrings that said this is going to be an issue here or there. But I think ultimately, what is the reason for this legislation? The reason is to try and combat and update our laws in relation to online hate speech and hate speech in general, which is completely outdated, hasn't kept up with the time, and we need to move with the time. And I think if this event that we were here speaking about earlier, if that event is to show anything,
no, and I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you on that event, by the way. But mind you, I don't think the people who complain should be criminalised for it. They're stupid, but they shouldn't be criminalised for it. They should have been more informed, and they should have. What?
But it depends on what they said, and that's the ultimate thing here. It depends on what they said. And that's whereby, there is different degrees of what one can say as a reasonable debate and what becomes abusive. And that's for the court ultimately to decide.
Okay, well, listen, and I'm sorry for landing that on you, Fintan, but I thought it was relevant in relation to the conversation we're having, because obviously you ventured into the area of talking about, hate speech and this kind of online abuse, which, by the way, I'm not denying that online abuse has certainly grown over the last few years. Mind you, the internet is growing and social media is growing, and I think it's only going to get worse to some degree, or maybe hopefully better as well. Listen, Fintan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And again, I'm sorry to hear the show was cancelled. It shouldn't have been cancelled. And the people who complained about it are gobshites, or gombeans, as Albert Reynolds was called. All right.
No problem. And to open a welcome to those listening in from across the country to Carlow for our fantastic Pride Festival on the 2nd of July.
All right, listen, thank you very much indeed, Fintan. Appreciate you coming on the air.
Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio, the multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic